It was certainly an excruciating end to the season. Now it's an excruciatingly long off season for Ohio State football fans. But of course, we've got spring football coming up in just a few weeks, actually on March 2nd or March 3rd to look forward to. We got Steve Hellwagon on the line. This is our Ohio State Buckeyes live show that we bring you each and every week. It's mighty important that you subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell. Therefore, you know when we're coming on, because we've got a number of schedules to navigate and can't nail down a time each and every week. So this week we come to you on Friday. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Appreciate you jumping on board as always. The transfer rule has long since been a talking point among college football nation in regards to the nomadic nature of head coaches moving on to better opportunities or being ousted from their current positions, and a student athlete making a certain commitment to a head coach and a coaching staff and a positional coach who most likely is not going to be there for 4 or 5 years. If you really look at the analytics across the board and the average lifespan at a particular school, and allowing these kids a little bit more freedom to transfer. So on Tuesday, the NCAA announced, as I'm reading from Bucknuts, that it's exploring another rule change when it comes to transfers about a year and a half after creating the transfer portal, where student athletes can submit their names, allowing coaches from other programs to contact them. The NCAA is now examining a way where an athlete can transfer and be immediately eligible without needing a waiver, and I believe that's a one-time opportunity.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. The Big Ten, I think, got out in front of this, was the first major conference to support the legislation change. And there is a moratorium, I guess, right now on major reforms in terms of transfers, I guess, in terms of the NCAA. But there has been some movement that they may be able to make a slight change to whatever rules are involved until they're able to craft something that's a more permanent piece of legislation going through. So it's possible this could be enacted for the 2020-2021, a lot of 20s in there, the 2020-21 school year, which would start obviously this fall. I think that's the hope, is that this one-time exemption that would allow student athletes to move without penalty, which means they wouldn't have to sit out a year, take that year in residence at their next school, that would be done away with. I think one of the impetuses to this is you look at different situations that have cropped up across the country. You had Justin Fields got an exemption to come to Ohio State for whatever reason that was. Tate Martell got an exemption to be eligible right away at Miami for whatever reason that was. Then you have a case like an Ohio State basketball player, Micah Potter, who left in the fall of 2018 and was not eligible until December of 2019, 14 months after he had declared he was leaving the Ohio State program. He was finally eligible at his new school at Wisconsin. So there was no congruity, there was no consistency to what was granted a hardship waiver and what wasn't granted a hardship waiver. And so I think that they're just trying to go for uniformity, as well as make this case that, they are student athlete friendly in terms of their rights, because really students, there's statistics out there that nearly 30 or 40% of the entire student body rank and file will attend more than one college during their college career. Students, athletes in all but 5 sports, and they're the so-called revenue sports, which I think are men's and women's basketball, football, and then 2 others, maybe hockey and baseball or wrestling. I don't know, 2 of those 3 were not able to be immediately eligible at new schools. And I think that the upshot of this is now they're going to give everybody a one-time waiver to where you can go to a second school and not have to sit out. There are a lot of people that are up in arms about this because the Group of Five, the MAC, Conference USA, the American, if a guy achieves an all-league status in those leagues, or potentially even all-American status, what would stop him from pulling up stakes and going to a Power Five school to improve his draft stock the following year? Plus, you have all the amenities, better competition, better training, everything else that comes at the Power Five schools. So I think that there is some hesitation about that. But as I talked to one of our recruiting analysts at 24/7, there's this idea that every kid has signed with the school with the express purpose of transferring to another school. And he said that's simply not the case. The kids do not want to transfer. That's why they chose the first school that they are attending. And the hope is that loyalty will keep them there. And again, as he put it, the coaches in a lot of cases are pushing kids to transfer so that they can free up scholarships and give them to who they feel are perceived to be better players coming out of the high school or junior college or transfer ranks. So a lot there to unpack, but I guess I'd be in favor of this. It's going to create constant free agency, it seems, in terms of college recruiting and transferring. And you just hope there's not a lot of tampering involved with athletes at one school hearing from athletes at other school or coaches at other schools that, hey, the grass is greener over here. If you leave college one and come to college two, we'll take better care of you. So I'm okay with it. I guess we'll just have to see how it all plays out.
Well, the comment that your recruiting analyst made makes total sense, that none of us go to a university and make that life-changing type of decision with the thought in our mind that if things don't work out and I'm anticipating moving on from here in a year or two. It's a very important decision for students in general, but then you tack on the responsibility of a student athlete. They want to make a decision that's going to stick for 4 years. On the other hand, I'm going to be selfish as a college football fan, and as a college sports fan, we become attached to these players, and it's a very short lifespan as it is. And at the same time, the roster churn and the roster turnover is significant as it is. And being sports fans, that's one significant difference between the collegiate ranks and the professional ranks, as you expect. That guy's an Ohio State player. He's forever going to be an Ohio State player. 30 years from now, after he's played in the NFL and retired and gone on, we can always say he was an Ohio State Buckeye and will always be a Buckeye. But that's just not the case. There were very few even graduate transfers 10 or 15 years ago. And that was obviously the first step in this, was the graduate transfer process that we've seen just explode in the last 10 years or so, I would say. To the point where with this transfer portal, graduate transfers, and just plain transfers, you look at most kids, as I go through statistics and just try to track players, and I'll look at their career stats and I'll realize, oh, that kid started out somewhere else. And it seems like every other player I look at now started at another school, and that's unfortunate. But their life, their career is much more important than my petty thoughts as a college football fan and wanting kids to stay at the same school just so that they stay at the same school, and it creates that continuity for the fan base. That's certainly very much secondary to what's best for the student athlete. But I do think that it should be a serious decision that's made, and where these kids aren't just jumping from school to school. And it seems as though the rules in place currently and the projected rules would guard that to a certain extent. Although, as you mentioned, with the likes of a Tate Martell, a Justin Fields, and we can go through dozens and dozens of examples, it seems as though the process of reviewing these transfer applications and the conditions and the eligibility have been loosened anyway, because hardly did any kid get immediate eligibility a few years ago. And now it seems as though 75 to 80% of them come up with some type of reason that gets passed by everyone in regards to getting that initial eligibility at the new school.
Yeah, I think it's become almost a thing where you just don't. It's like they move the goal line on what is acceptable and what isn't, in terms of those immediate transfers. And I think in a field situation, well documented, I think it was understandable. Martell's situation, there was a head coaching change. Are we going to give guys a pass just because of a head coaching change or whatever? You look at the guys that Mel Tucker signed at Colorado, and I don't know how many of them he had in the late signing period in February as opposed to the early signing period in December. But it wasn't long after that second signing day in February that Luke Fickell turned down the Michigan State job, and then Michigan State, since they need to hit a grand slam home run, came back at Mel Tucker with even more money and more stability and everything else, and chose him and threw a deal at him, doubling his pay. I mean, well, heck yes, he's going to leave Colorado to double his pay and to be in a much better league, the Big Ten, than the Pac-12. So, you look at it, and I think that some of this skeptics are saying is being done to help temper what is becoming the inevitable fight for name, image, and likeness, that it's kind of a collective bargaining situation like we're here with the NFL right now is, okay, we'll give you some transfer freedom. We're really not going to give you a whole lot on name, image, and likeness, not like you think you might. And I found it humorous, Jay Bilas, who is always championing the student-athlete rights with his various tweets, said that the NCAA said that the issue is so complex that and really deeply rooted in competitive issues in terms of recruiting and maintaining a level field of play, as if that actually exists nowadays, that they can't have an outside force figure this issue out, the name, image, and likeness, because it's so complicated. The NCAA is the only one that understands this issue to the point where it can be solved, and yet that defies the fact that they've had a decade or longer, since the first Ramogi Huga and O'Bannon and some of these other cases came up. They've had over a decade to solve it and haven't made even one step toward trying to resolve this. They're being dragged in part of their brief that they put in to the government about being the only ones who could solve this was that the California law was unconstitutional. And so they are being dragged kicking and screaming into this other realm with name, image, and likeness. And there's a lot of people that think this transfer thing is just a red herring to distract people away from the thing that they don't want to deal with upon, penalty of death, is giving kids name, image, and likeness rights. So I guess the Dennis Dodds of the world and the Dan Wetzels and the 40s and all these guys who make the big bucks to comment on that NCAA level stuff, keep an eye on those guys, because there's going to be a lot of this coming down in the next couple of years as they really try and sink their teeth into what the next step is going to be in the college athletic model. And, every time one of these crises comes up, you wonder, is this going to be the end of college athletics as we know it? And NCAA always dodges that bullet one way or the other, and they still maintain a way. They've kept it together this long, and they'll find a way, I'm sure, to maintain the status quo for as long as they can.